Can a tiny insect really change the course of someone's fate? What is the dark secret behind that strange beetle that leaves no one untouched? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's tale is The Beetle Hunter by Arthur Conan Doyle, a classic tale reimagined and retold for the modern age.
A curious experience, the doctor began, his voice trailing off as he glanced over his audience. Yes, my friends, I've had one, but I never expected it to happen again. In fact, the odds are so absurd, I doubt anyone could experience something like it twice in a lifetime. You can believe me or not, but this is exactly how it unfolded. He paused, as if deciding how much to reveal before continuing. It was early in my career, before I had a proper practice of my own. I lived in a modest room on Gower Street. The street's been renumbered since then, but the house I stayed in was unmistakable. The only one with a bow window, tucked on the left side as you walk down from the Metropolitan Station. At the time, it was run by a widow, Mrs. Murchison, who kept a quiet house with 3 medical students and an engineer as tenants. I occupied the top room, the cheapest one, though cheap was a stretch for my dwindling finances. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. As the weeks passed, my funds began to evaporate. It became clear that I needed to take some action, yet I couldn't bring myself to jump into the ordinary grind of general practice. My heart, my real passion, lay in science, specifically zoology. The intricate lives of creatures, the mysteries they held, were what truly fascinated me. But the medical world, that was something I didn't want to be tethered to forever. I'd nearly given up, ready to accept the fate of a medical drudge, when everything changed, unexpectedly, in a way that seemed too outlandish to believe. The doctor paused again, eyes narrowing as if remembering the moment vividly. One morning, while idly skimming through the Standard, I came across an advertisement that would alter my path. The paper had little to offer that day, nothing worth reading, when my gaze locked onto a peculiar notice at the top of the personal column. It read, "Wanted for 1 or more days the services of a medical man, must possess strong physical health, steady nerves, and a resolute nature. A specialist in entomology, coleopterist preferred. Apply in person at 77B Brook Street. Applications close at noon today." Now, you must understand, he added with a slight smile, my devotion to zoology. Of all creatures, it was the study of insects that captivated me most, and of all insects, beetles were my obsession, my area of expertise. Butterfly collectors, I thought, are a common breed, but beetles are something else entirely. They're far more varied, more abundant, and certainly more accessible here in these islands. That's what first drew me to them, and over time I had built my own collection, a modest one, about 100 varieties. But it wasn't just the beetles that piqued my interest. It was the strange combination of qualities the advertisement asked for that caught my attention. Strong physique, steady nerves, medical training, and a deep knowledge of beetles. It was like a puzzle I couldn't resist. He paused, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. As for the other requirements, I was confident. My nerves were as steady as steel, and I'd even won the weight-throwing competition at the inter-hospital sports. I was fit, I was ready, and I was certainly the right man for the job. Within 5 minutes of reading that ad, I was in a cab speeding towards Brook Street.
The doctor's voice lowered, his expression distant. As I rode, my mind raced, trying to piece together the enigma of this strange request. What sort of job could possibly need someone with such an odd mix of traits? A strong body, a sharp mind, medical training, And an entomologist's passion for beetles? The more I thought about it, the more baffling it became. But then the nagging truth settled in. I had nothing to lose. My resources were all but drained, and the opportunity, no matter how strange, was a lifeline. I was ready for whatever strange adventure awaited me, even if it led me to disaster. After all, I had nothing left to gamble but my time, and time, as they say, was something I could risk. He paused, as if reliving the moment. Number 77B, Brook Street, was a building that could only be described as dreary, but with an air of ancient respectability. It had that grim, imposing look that only old Georgian houses possess, dull, flat-faced, and seemingly unchanged by time. When the cab stopped, I stepped out, and just as I did, a young man hurried past me, his footsteps quick and purposeful. He didn't even glance in my direction. As the young man passed me on the street, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, sharp, calculating, and just a little sinister. He didn't stop or speak, but something about the way he sized me up made my skin tingle. I took it as a good sign. After all, if he resented my presence, it meant the job wasn't filled yet, and that filled me with a strange, quiet hope. He smiled, almost to himself. I climbed the wide steps to the front door, and with a firm grip, I knocked hard. The sound echoed, and I was filled with anticipation. The doctor leaned in, his voice dropping as if revealing a secret. A footman in full livery answered the door. Powdered wig, fine clothes, the whole package. This was a house of wealth, a house of influence. "Yes, sir?" the footman said, eyeing me with a polite, distant curiosity. "I've come in answer to—" "Quite so, sir," he interrupted, almost as if he'd been expecting me. "Lord Linchmere will see you at once, in the library." Lord Linchmere. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. I followed the footman, my thoughts swirling, as we moved through the halls of the grand house. Finally, we arrived at a large library. The room was vast, filled with towering shelves of books. Behind a desk, a man sat, a small figure, his face clean-shaven and expressive, with long gray-streaked hair combed back from his forehead. He held my card in his hand, his gaze sharp and calculating as he sized me up. He studied me for a moment, a smile creeping across his face as if I had already been measured and found worthy. His voice was steady, confident. "Dr. Hamilton, I presume," I said, my heart beating faster. "Yes, sir," I answered, my heart beating faster. "Do you fulfill the qualifications outlined in my advertisement?" he asked, the words almost clinical in their precision. "I believe I do," I replied, holding his gaze. He looked me over again, a subtle but probing glance. "You appear to be a strong man. I trust that's the case?" "I think I'm fairly strong," I said, not without pride. "And resolute?" His voice was sharper now, as though he was searching for something deeper. "I believe so," I answered, feeling the weight of his scrutiny. "Have you ever faced imminent danger?" He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "No, I don't think I ever have," I said, uncertain of the direction this conversation was taking. "But you think you would be calm, quick-thinking in such a situation?" His tone was almost a challenge now. "I hope so," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Well, I believe you would," Lord Linchmere said, his eyes narrowing slightly as though weighing my every word. "I have more confidence in you, precisely because you're not pretending to know exactly how you would act in an unfamiliar situation. That's a rare quality. In terms of personal traits, I think you're exactly the man I've been looking for. Now that that's settled, let's move on to the next point." I raised an eyebrow, wondering what this next point might be. "Which is—" He leaned forward eagerly, the anticipation almost palpable in his posture.
Let's talk about beetles. I froze for a moment, half expecting him to laugh or smile, but instead his face was serious, his eyes sharp with intensity. It was clear he wasn't joking. He was waiting for my response with a certain urgency. "I'm afraid you don't know about beetles," he said, almost with a hint of desperation in his voice. I was taken aback. "On the contrary, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "It's the only area of science where I feel I truly excel." His face lit up with an almost childlike joy. "I'm overjoyed to hear it. Please talk to me about beetles." Without hesitation, I dove into the topic. I didn't try to be profound or original, just gave him a concise overview of the beetle's defining traits. I listed off the more common species, briefly touched on the ones in my own collection, and even mentioned the article on burying beetles I had contributed to the Journal of Entomological Science. Lord Linchmere's eyes widened as I spoke, and suddenly he burst out, "What? Not a collector?" His voice was filled with surprise. "You don't mean to say that you are a collector?" I nodded, amused by his enthusiasm. "Yes, I collect them." His reaction was almost gleeful. "You are absolutely the man for my purpose," he said, his voice nearly a whisper. "I knew someone like you must exist somewhere in a city of 5 million, but the challenge has always been finding him. I've been incredibly fortunate to find you." He rang a small gong on the table, the sharp sound echoing through the room. A moment later, the footman entered, bowing slightly. "Ask Lady Rossiter to step this way," Lord Linchmere said, his tone respectful but with an edge of urgency. A few moments later, the door opened again, and a woman entered. She was small, perhaps in her mid-40s, and bore a striking resemblance to Lord Linchmere. Sharp, intelligent features framed by gray-black hair. But unlike his composed demeanor, her face carried an expression I hadn't expected. Anxiety, deep and palpable. It was as if some hidden sorrow had aged her, casting a shadow over her otherwise sharp features. As Lord Linchmere introduced me, Lady Rossiter turned to face me, and for the first time I noticed something that made my heart skip. A faint but unmistakable scar stretching across her right eyebrow, 2 inches long. It was partially covered by a thin band of plaster, but the wound was fresh enough that I could tell it hadn't healed completely. The injury seemed deep, as though it had been inflicted only recently. It gave her face an unsettling, almost haunted look. "Dr. Hamilton is the perfect man for our purpose, Evelyn," Lord Linchmere said, his voice full of certainty. "He's a beetle collector. He's even written articles on the subject." Lady Rossiter's expression lightened, though her voice carried a hint of disbelief. "Really? Then you must have heard of my husband. Everyone who knows anything about beetles must have heard of Sir Thomas Rossiter." At last, a connection began to form in the fog of this strange situation. Sir Thomas Rossiter. Yes, now I understood. He was the undisputed authority on beetles, the world's foremost expert. He had spent a lifetime studying them, and his exhaustive work on the subject was renowned. I nodded eagerly, assuring her that I had indeed read his work and found it invaluable. "Have you met my husband?" she asked, her voice tinged with a kind of quiet pride. "No, I haven't," I replied, the name still heavy with respect in my mind. "Well, you shall," Lord Linchmere interjected decisively. Lady Rossiter remained standing beside her brother, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. As I looked at the two of them together, it became unmistakably clear they weren't just partners in this strange endeavor. They were siblings. A silence fell over the room, and then, with a slight tremor in her voice, Lady Rossiter spoke again, her gaze flickering toward her brother. "Are you really prepared for this, Charles? I know it's noble of you, but I fear for you." Her words were soft, filled with worry, and I saw something in Lord Linchmere's face that I hadn't noticed before. Uncertainty, even fear. He quickly masked it, but the effort was obvious.
He was just as troubled as his sister, though he was doing his best to conceal it. "Evelyn, don't worry. It's settled. It's decided. There's no other way, no other choice I can see." She shook her head slowly, as if she had doubts that words alone could soothe. "There is another way, Charles." "No," he replied, shaking his head firmly, his voice filled with a sudden hard resolve. "I will never abandon you, never. It's all going to be fine. It will all work out, you'll see. And think about it. What a sign, what a stroke of fate that such a perfect instrument as Dr. Hamilton should appear at just the right moment." My position in the room was growing more awkward by the second. It felt as though, for a moment, Lord Linchmere and Lady Rossiter had forgotten I was even there. The tension between them lingered in the air, thick and heavy, before Lord Linchmere snapped back to the matter at hand. "Dr. Hamilton," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, "the task I want to assign you is this. I need you to place yourself completely at my disposal. I need you to accompany me on a short journey, to remain by my side at all times, and to promise, without question, to do whatever I ask of you, no matter how unreasonable it may seem." I raised an eyebrow, taken aback. That's quite a lot to ask. Lord Linchmere's gaze didn't waver. "Unfortunately, I cannot be more specific. I don't yet know what direction things will take. But you have my word that I will not ask you to do anything that would compromise your conscience. And when this is all over, you will take pride in having been part of something important, something worthwhile." "If it ends happily," Lady Rossiter murmured under her breath. "Exactly. If it ends happily," Lord Linchmere repeated, his voice firm. I hesitated. "And the terms?" £20 a day." I must have shown my face on his shock, for his lordship smiled slightly, a knowing glint in his eye.
"It's a rare combination of skills, as you must have realized when you first read the advertisement," he explained. "Such a unique set of qualities deserves a proper reward, and I won't hide from you, the job may prove difficult, even dangerous, but the truth is, the whole matter could be resolved in just a few days." "Please God," Lady Rossiter added, her voice tinged with something akin to desperation. Lord Linchmere nodded gravely. "Now, Dr. Hamilton, can I count on your assistance?" "Most definitely," I said, the decision made in a heartbeat. "Just tell me what I need to do." "Your first task is simple. Return to your home and pack whatever you need for a brief stay in the country. We depart from Paddington Station at 3:40 this afternoon." "How far are we going?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. "As far as Pangbourne," Lord Linchmere said, his voice calm but urgent. "Meet me at the bookstall at 3:30. I'll have the tickets. Goodbye, Dr. Hamilton. And, by the way, there are 2 things I'd like you to bring if you have them. Your Beetle collection case and a walking stick. The thicker and heavier, the better." I stood there for a moment, the words echoing in my mind. As I made my way from Brook Street to Paddington Station, my thoughts raced. The whole situation twisted and turned in my head, every detail shifting like a kaleidoscope. Each time I thought I had a handle on it, a new, even more bizarre explanation sprang to mind, until, in the end, I had a dozen theories, each more improbable than the last. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth would be just as wildly improbable. I gave up trying to untangle the mystery. The only thing left to do was follow Lord Linchmere's instructions to the letter. So, with my valise, specimen case, and the heaviest cane I could find, I arrived at the Paddington bookstall right on time. Lord Linchmere was already there, though he was even smaller than I had imagined. Frail and pale, his nervous energy almost tangible. He wore a thick travelling coat, the kind that seemed to swallow his slight frame, and in his hand was a heavy blackthorn cudgel. "I have the tickets," he said, his voice sharp as he led the way up to the platform.
This is our train. I've reserved a carriage. There are a few things I must impress upon you while we're traveling." He was acting like a man who was about to deliver some crucial, world-altering secret, but in the end, his message was simple. "Remember, Dr. Hamilton, you are here as my protection. Under no circumstances are you to leave me alone." He repeated the phrase over and over, his voice growing more insistent as the journey progressed, until his words felt almost like a mantra. His nerves were clearly fraying, the quiet tension in his movements betraying him. "Yes," he said at last, as if answering the unspoken question in my eyes. "Yes, I am nervous, Dr. Hamilton. I've always been. It's part of my constitution, my frailty. But my soul, my will is strong. I can face dangers that would send others running. What I'm doing now, Dr. Hamilton, is not out of obligation. No, it's a matter of duty," Lord Linchmere said, his voice quiet but heavy with an almost unbearable weight. "And yet there's no denying that this is a desperate risk. If things go awry, I suppose I'll have earned the title of martyr." I felt the strain of his cryptic, almost tortured words. The riddles, the secrecy, it was too much. I had to break the tension, confront the growing frustration building within me.
"I think, sir," I said carefully, "it would be much better if you trusted me entirely. It's impossible for me to act effectively if I don't know what we're trying to achieve, or even where we're going." Lord Linchmere's eyes flickered, but he gave no immediate response. After a moment, he finally spoke, his voice steady but guarded. "As for where we're going, Dr. Hamilton, there need be no mystery. We're headed to Delamere Court, Sir Thomas Rossiter's residence. I'm sure you're familiar with his work, given your interest in beetles." A sharp pause. He hesitated, as though weighing whether to continue. "As for the exact purpose of our visit," he said, his tone becoming more elusive, "I'm not sure that revealing too much at this stage would be of any use. I can tell you this. We are acting, and I say we because my sister, Lady Rossiter, shares my view, that the sole objective is to prevent any form of family scandal. You can imagine, I'm sure, why I'm reluctant to offer explanations that are unnecessary." I nodded, though frustration gnawed at me. "If I were asking your advice, it would be different, but right now, Dr. Hamilton, all I need from you is your active help. I will guide you on how you can best assist me as the situation unfolds." I felt the weight of his words settle between us. There was no more to say. The sum he offered, £20 a day, was a temptation I couldn't ignore. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was treating me as little more than a tool, a means to an end. Like the blackthorn in his hand, I was meant to be passive, to follow his lead without question. But as I looked at him, I couldn't ignore the sense that this wasn't just about some trivial family matter. Lord Linchmere was on edge, his nerves frayed, and I suspected that scandal, the kind that could ruin lives, was a terror that gripped him more tightly than anything else. He wouldn't bring me into his confidence until there was no other choice. I had no choice but to rely on my own instincts, my eyes and my ears. But something told me, deep down, that I wouldn't have to trust them for long before the truth would start to unravel. Delamere Court lay a good 5 miles from Pangbourne Station, and we made the journey in an open fly, the wind biting at our faces as we sped through the countryside. Lord Linchmere was lost in thought, his eyes distant, his mind clearly preoccupied. He didn't speak a word during the ride, and I wondered what weighed so heavily on him. It wasn't until we were almost at our destination that he finally broke the silence. His words surprised me.
"Perhaps you're unaware, Dr. Hamilton," he said, his tone almost casual. "I am a medical man, just like yourself." I blinked, taken aback. "No, sir, I didn't know that." "Yes, I qualified many years ago, before the peerage became my path. I haven't had much occasion to practice, but the training has proven invaluable. I've never regretted the time I spent studying medicine." He looked at me for the first time, a wry smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "And now here we are, the gates of Delamere Court." We had arrived. 2 high stone pillars, crowned with strange heraldic creatures, marked the entrance to a winding avenue. Through the thick laurel bushes and rhododendrons, I caught sight of Delamere Court itself, a sprawling mansion with many gables, ivy draped over its warm, weathered bricks. The house exuded a quiet charm, as though it had lived through centuries, quietly watching the world change.
My gaze was still fixed on the house, admiring its beauty, when I felt a sharp tug on my sleeve. Lord Linchmere's voice dropped to a whisper. "Here's Sir Thomas. Talk about beetles. Talk about them as much as you can." I turned, following his gaze, and saw a tall, thin figure emerge from behind the hedge of laurels. The man was oddly angular, his frame bony and stretched, as though his body had been carved from a single rough block of stone. He held a spade in one gloved hand, his fingers wrapped tightly in gauntlets. A broad-brimmed gray hat shaded his face, but I could still make out the harshness of his features. His beard was scruffy, his face gaunt, marked by the uneven lines of a life lived in isolation. The fly pulled up to a stop, and Lord Linchmere wasted no time. He jumped out and greeted the figure with forced enthusiasm. "My dear Thomas, how are you?" he said, his voice warm, almost too warm. But Sir Thomas's response was far from warm. He glared at me, his eyes cold and calculating as he looked past his brother-in-law. I caught fragments of muttered sentences, well-known wishes, hatred of strangers, unjustifiable intrusion, perfectly inexcusable. His voice was like the rustling of dry leaves, harsh and unyielding. There was a brief, strained conversation, and then the 2 men approached the fly together. "Let me introduce you to Sir Thomas Rossiter, Dr. Hamilton," Lord Linchmere said, his voice almost too cheerful. "I believe you'll find you share a strong common interest." I bowed politely, and Sir Thomas, standing tall and rigid, regarded me with a sharp, almost piercing gaze from under the broad brim of his hat. "Lord Linchmere tells me you know something about beetles," Sir Thomas said, in a flat, controlled voice. "What do you know about beetles?" The question was blunt, as if I were being tested, and I wasn't expecting an interrogation. But I had prepared myself for this moment. I didn't falter. "I know what I've learned from your work on the Coleoptera, Sir Thomas," I replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Name the better-known species of the British Scarabaei." I hadn't anticipated this, but my mind raced through the species I knew. Thankfully, I was ready. I gave him a list of names, my voice steady. The more I spoke, the more his stern face softened. His shoulders relaxed just slightly. "You've read my book with some attention, I see," Sir Thomas said, his voice no longer so cold. "It's rare, you know, to find someone who truly grasps these things. Most people can waste time on society and sport, but beetles, they're beneath notice. I can tell you, most of the idiots around here don't even know I've written a book. I, who first described the true function of the elytra." He almost seemed to relish the opportunity to share his accomplishment. "I'm pleased to see someone who understands the importance of the subject.
You've come at just the right time. I have no doubt that I can show you some specimens that will pique your interest." With that, he climbed into the fly and motioned for us to follow. As we drove toward the house, Sir Thomas launched into a detailed exposition about some recent research he'd conducted on the anatomy of the ladybird. His enthusiasm was as strange as it was intense, and I found myself listening closely, despite the oddity of the man. Upon arrival at the house, Sir Thomas removed his hat, revealing something that had been hidden before. His forehead, naturally high, appeared even higher due to the receding hairline. But it wasn't the height of his forehead that caught my attention. It was the unsettling, involuntary movements, a nervous twitching, or at times a strange rotational motion constantly affected his brow, as if some unseen force controlled the muscles there. The motion was both distracting and disturbing.
As he turned towards us after entering the study, the movement was even more pronounced. It was striking, almost hypnotic, a stark contrast to his hard, unwavering gray eyes. His gaze remained fixed, intense, steady, as though nothing could disrupt his focus. Yet beneath that intense stare, I couldn't help but wonder, what was the cause of that strange, continual twitching? It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. "I'm sorry," Sir Thomas said with a slight frown, "that Lady Rossiter is not here to welcome you. By the way, Charles, did Evelyn mention when she plans to return?" Lord Linchmere sighed, his voice tinged with a quiet resignation. "She's staying in London for a few more days. You know how it is. Social duties pile up when they've been out in the country too long. She's got many old friends visiting right now." Sir Thomas nodded, but there was an underlying sadness in his eyes. "Well, she's her own mistress, and I wouldn't want to interfere with her plans. But I'll admit, I'll be glad when I see her again. It's very lonely here without her company." Lord Linchmere's voice softened, almost as if he were trying to console his brother-in-law. "I feared you might find it so, which is part of why I came down. Dr. Hamilton here is so deeply interested in your work, I thought you might enjoy his company. I trust you wouldn't mind him accompanying me." Sir Thomas turned to me with a look that was as cold as it was curious. "I lead a quiet life, Dr. Hamilton. My aversion to strangers has only grown over the years. Perhaps my nerves are not what they once were. My younger days, spent traveling to malarial and dangerous places in search of beetles, have taken their toll." There was a long pause before he continued, as if carefully choosing his words. "But a fellow coleopterist, well, that's always a welcome guest. I would be pleased if you would look over my collection. Well, I think it may be fair to say it's the finest in Europe." I nodded, intrigued. Sir Thomas wasn't exaggerating. The collection was extraordinary. He led me into a large room where a massive oak cabinet stood, its drawers wide and shallow. Inside, each drawer was filled with neatly organized specimens, beetles from every corner of the world, their colors dazzling in the dim light, black, brown, blue, green, and mottled, each one meticulously ticketed as though they were treasures rather than insects. As Sir Thomas swept his hand over the rows of specimens, he would occasionally pause, carefully picking up a rare beetle as though handling something sacred. His fingers trembled slightly as he examined each one, his voice growing animated as he described their peculiarities, recounting the circumstances under which they had been acquired. It was clear that this was more than just a hobby for him. It was an obsession, a lifelong passion. It seemed that for once, Sir Thomas had found a listener who truly understood his fascination, and so he talked and talked. His words flowed like a river, recounting tales of expeditions, discoveries, and strange encounters in far-off lands. The hours slipped by unnoticed. What had started as a conversation about beetles soon stretched into the deepening evening, the light from the setting sun fading into the shadows of night. It wasn't until the gong rang out, signaling it was time to dress for dinner, that the flow of his speech came to a halt. Throughout the evening, Lord Linchmere remained silent, standing by his brother-in-law. But every now and then I noticed him casting quick, furtive glances at Sir Thomas, his expression betraying a deep undercurrent of emotion, apprehension, curiosity, perhaps even sympathy. It was as though he was waiting for something, afraid of something, though I couldn't for the life of me figure out what. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lord Linchmere was on edge, anticipating something, though what it was I could not begin to imagine. The evening passed in a quiet, almost serene atmosphere. Sir Thomas, despite his eccentricities, seemed more affable as the night went on. He spoke with genuine warmth about his absent wife and son, and I could see how much he missed them. He confessed that without his scientific studies to occupy him, he'd scarcely be able to pass the time. If nothing else, his devotion to his work gave him a sense of purpose. After dinner, we retired to the billiard room, where we smoked and chatted for a while before heading to bed early. But that's when the first unsettling thought crossed my mind. For the first time, I wondered if Lord Linchmere might be unhinged. As I entered my bedroom, I was startled to see him follow me in, his face pale, his movements swift but somehow hesitant. "Doctor," he whispered urgently, his voice low and frantic, "you must come with me. You must spend the night in my room." I stared at him, bewildered. "What do you mean?" He seemed to hesitate, his eyes darting around the room as though checking to make sure we were alone. "I prefer not to explain right now, but this is part of your duties. My room is right next door. You can return to your own before the servant calls you in the morning." "But why?" I asked, my confusion growing. Lord Linchmere's eyes shifted nervously, and he muttered, "Because I'm nervous of being alone. There, now you have a reason." His words were delivered with such an unsettling urgency that I almost thought I'd misheard him. It seemed completely irrational, utterly mad. But the thought of the £20 still echoed in my mind, outweighing all my objections. Without another word, I followed him down the hall to his room. "Well," I said, trying to make sense of the situation, "there's only room for one in that bed." "Only one shall occupy it," he replied, his voice tense. "And the other?" I asked. "Must remain on watch." "Why?" I pressed. "One would think you were expecting to be attacked." "Perhaps I am." I stared at him, confused. "In that case, why not lock your door?" "Perhaps I want to be attacked," he answered, his eyes flickering with something dark. It was becoming more and more like lunacy, and I felt the full weight of it. But there was nothing to be done, no other option but to comply. I shrugged, defeated, and sank into the armchair next to the empty fireplace. "So I'm to remain on watch?" I asked, a trace of sarcasm creeping into my voice. "We'll divide the night," he replied, his voice low but insistent. "If you'll watch until 2, I'll take the remainder." "Very good," I muttered. "Call me at 2 o'clock, he instructed, his voice low but insistent. "I will," I said, trying to match his solemnity. "Keep your ears open," he continued. "If you hear anything at all, wake me instantly. Do you understand? Instantly." "You can rely on it," I said, though I was beginning to wonder if I was the one losing my grip. "And for God's sake," he added, his voice quivering slightly, "don't fall asleep." With that, he discarded only his coat, threw the coverlet over himself, and settled into bed, his eyes still darting about the room as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. The night stretched on in an oppressive silence. I sat, stiff and uncomfortable, beside the empty hearth, trying to keep my mind from wandering. It felt like a futile exercise. What could Lord Linchmere possibly fear in Sir Thomas's house? If he suspected danger, why not lock the door? His bizarre statement that he might want to be attacked only compounded my confusion. Why would anyone want to be attacked? Who would even want to harm him? The longer I sat there, the more absurd the whole situation seemed. And yet I was determined to follow his orders. After all, I was still bound by my duty as long as I was in his employ. So I sat in the chair, listening to the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hallway. It chimed every quarter hour, its sound gurgling through the silence, dragging time along with it. The house was eerily still, save for the occasional chime. It was a long, endless vigil. The quiet pressed in on me, thick and suffocating, and all the while my mind refused to settle. What was Lord Linchmere so afraid of? Was he simply paranoid, or was there something truly wrong in this house? I didn't know, but the silence had begun to feel less like peace and more like a warning. A small lamp sat on the table next to my elbow, casting a soft pool of light around my chair, but leaving the far corners of the room shrouded in darkness. Lord Linchmere lay on the bed, breathing deeply and peacefully, his body relaxed in sleep. For a moment, I envied him his calm. My own eyelids grew heavy, and again I found myself drifting towards sleep, but each time the weight of my responsibility snapped me back. Duty kept me awake. I rubbed my eyes, pinched my arm, forcing myself to stay alert, determined to see through this absurd watch. I held on, hour after hour, until finally the chimes of 2 o'clock echoed down the quiet hall. I leaned over and gently placed my hand on Lord Linchmere's shoulder. He jerked awake, his eyes instantly wide, alert. "You've heard something?" His voice was tight with expectation. "No, sir," I replied, my voice thick with exhaustion. "It's 2 o'clock." "Very good," he said, his expression shifting from tense to relieved. "I'll take over now. You can sleep." I didn't argue. I lay down under the covers, trying to push the thoughts from my mind. Within moments, I was unconscious. The last thing I remembered was the dim circle of light from the lamp, and Lord Linchmere's small, hunched figure sitting in its center, his face drawn and anxious. How long I slept, I couldn't say, but I was jolted awake by a sharp tug on my sleeve. The room was dark, but the heavy smell of oil hung in the air, telling me the lamp had just been snuffed out. "Quick, quick!" came Lord Linchmere's frantic whisper in my ear. I sprang from the bed, disoriented, but he was already pulling at my arm, dragging me toward the far corner of the room. "Hush! Listen!" In the oppressive silence of the night, I could hear it. A soft, stealthy step down the hallway. It was faint, intermittent, like someone pausing after each stride, making sure no one could hear him. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then came the slight shuffle of footsteps and the faint creak of a floorboard. A fresh step, closer now. Lord Linchmere was trembling. His grip on my sleeve tightened, his fingers twitching uncontrollably, like a branch caught in a windstorm. "What is it?" I whispered, barely able to suppress my growing unease. "It's him!" His voice was barely a whisper, barely controlled. "Is it Sir Thomas?" I asked, incredulous. "Yes," he hissed. "Shh! Don't do anything until I say." I strained to hear. There was a faint rattle from the door. Someone was trying the handle. The smallest crack of light leaked through the door, a thin slit that barely illuminated the edge of the room. A lamp burned somewhere down the hall, just enough to throw a faint glow against the door, casting shadows that stretched across the floor. The thin slit of light in the door grew wider, inch by inch, until the outline of a dark figure emerged in the doorway. He was squat, hunched, his silhouette grotesque, a misshapen dwarf, his body twisted unnaturally. The door creaked open slowly, the figure framed ominously in the doorway. And then, in the blink of an eye, the crouching shape shot up with terrifying speed. In one fluid motion, he leapt across the room, and a deafening thud echoed through the air as he struck the bed. 3 violent blows, one after the other, from something heavy and merciless. I stood frozen, my mind racing but unable to process what I was seeing. The shock of the moment paralyzed me, and I remained rooted to the spot until a blood-curdling scream from Lord Linchmere snapped me out of my stupor. The dim light from the open door gave me just enough visibility to see what was happening. Lord Linchmere, tiny and fierce, had launched himself onto his brother-in-law's back, locking his arms around the man's neck like a rabid terrier. Sir Thomas thrashed violently, his long, gangly limbs twisting and jerking in a desperate attempt to dislodge the smaller man. But Lord Linchmere held fast, his own panicked, strangled cries mixing with Sir Thomas's growls of rage. I couldn't stand it any longer. I rushed forward, the adrenaline surging through me, and together we managed to tackle Sir Thomas to the ground. But the battle was far from over. He fought like an animal, biting. His teeth sank into my shoulder with a sickening crunch. Every ounce of strength in my body went into restraining him, the struggle becoming desperate, ferocious. Finally, with a heaving effort, we pinned his arms to the floor, and Lord Linchmere, shaking with fear and exertion, grabbed the waistcord from the dressing gown and bound Sir Thomas's wrists. As I held the man's legs, my mind raced. What kind of monster had we unleashed? Then, from the hall, the sound of feet pounding on the floor broke the chaos. The butler and 2 footmen, drawn by the commotion, rushed into the room, and with their help we finally subdued the deranged man. Sir Thomas lay there, foaming at the mouth, his eyes wild with madness. One glance at his contorted, snarling face was all it took to confirm what I had feared. This man was a maniac, dangerous and utterly unhinged. The hammer lying beside the bed was a chilling sight, its heavy head stained with the intent of murder. It had been his weapon, the means by which he had planned to end the night.
"Do not use any violence," Lord Linchmere commanded, his voice shaking with urgency as we hauled the thrashing man upright. "He'll enter a stupor after this. It's already beginning." As if on cue, Sir Thomas's violent convulsions slowed. His head slumped forward, heavy as if asleep, his body suddenly still, almost peaceful. We carefully guided him down the hall and laid him on his bed, where he collapsed into unconsciousness, his breath coming in ragged, labored gasps. "2 of you remain with him," Lord Linchmere instructed the servants, his eyes never leaving Sir Thomas. "Dr. Hamilton, come with me. There are things I should have told you sooner, things that my fear of scandal prevented me from sharing. But now, after everything that's happened, you must know the truth. I promise you, you will never regret what you've done tonight." Once we were alone in his room, Lord Linchmere wasted no time. "The explanation is short, but it's painful. My brother-in-law is a good man, a loving husband, a devoted father, but there's madness in his bloodline, a madness that he can't escape. It runs deep in his family, and unfortunately, he is no exception." He paused, his eyes darkening. "Several times he's had violent outbursts, homicidal ones. What makes it worse is that when the fit is on him, he always turns on the person he loves most. His son was sent away to school to protect him, and you saw what happened to my sister when she tried to stay here with him. The wound she carried, it was from him. You must have noticed it when you met her in London." I nodded, now fully understanding. The pieces were falling into place. "He's not himself during those episodes. He doesn't remember any of it. In his right mind, he would scoff at the very idea that he could hurt anyone, least of all his family. It's a tragic irony, but it's also a bitter truth. He has no awareness of his own madness, and that's what makes this so hard. It's impossible to convince a man who's insane that he's anything but normal." Lord Linchmere's voice wavered with both frustration and sorrow.
We tried everything to keep him contained, to stop him from doing any harm. But he's a recluse, never sees anyone and refuses medical help. That was the real challenge. We needed a doctor to witness it, to prove his insanity. But we needed that doctor to see him in his moments of lucidity, not in his episodes. He's as sane as you or I, except for these rare bursts of violence. Fortunately, before each of these attacks, there are certain signs that forewarn us. These premonitions are almost like providence, little danger signals to alert us. The most telling of these is the twitching of his forehead, a nervous, involuntary contortion that always appears 3 to 4 days before the outbreak of his violent episodes. It's a grim reminder, but one that has allowed us to prepare. Lord Linchmere's voice grew softer, almost contemplative. When that symptom appears, his wife knows what it means. She comes to town under some pretext and stays at my house in Brook Street, away from him, where she's safe. He paused for a moment, clearly weighing his words. But that's not enough. To keep him locked away, to stop him from doing any harm, we had to convince a doctor of his insanity. That was the real challenge. The question was, how do I get a medical professional into Sir Thomas's home without raising suspicion? I remembered his obsession with beetles, his love for anyone who shared his passion. So I advertised, hoping to find a man who could stand up to the danger I knew was coming. That man was you, Dr. Hamilton. You were the one I needed, strong enough to face what I knew was coming.
His eyes met mine with a certain seriousness, and he added, "But there was more. I knew Sir Thomas's madness would manifest in a violent assault, likely on me. His affection for me in his rational moments made me a likely target. I trusted that given the right circumstances, you'd help us, help me, stop him before it was too late. You're an intelligent man, so I'm sure the rest of this will make sense." Lord Linchmere's words hit me hard, the weight of the entire situation sinking in. I never expected it to happen at night, though I suspected it. Most of these episodes occur in the dead of night, the early hours when everything is still. As for me, yes, I am a nervous man, but the alternative would have been letting my sister remain in danger. I could see no other way to keep her safe. He took a deep breath, then added, "I don't need to ask if you'll sign the lunacy papers. You've already seen enough to convince you, I'm sure." I nodded. "Of course, but 2 signatures are required, not just 1. Lord Linchmere smiled grimly. "You forget, Dr. Hamilton, I too hold a medical degree. I've prepared the papers." He reached to a side table where the documents were laid out. "If you'll sign them now, we can ensure that Sir Thomas is safely removed by morning." The chill that had creeped into my bones began to thaw as the night drew to a close. Sir Thomas, the famous Beetle Hunter, would be confined, and peace would return to Delamere Court. Yet as I left the room, a peculiar thought gnawed at me. The entire ordeal had been orchestrated with such precision, such meticulous planning, that I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. And so that was my visit to Sir Thomas Rossiter, the renowned entomologist. It was my first real step into success, though it didn't come without cost. Lady Rossiter and Lord Linchmere have proven to be loyal friends, forever grateful for my role in their time of need. As for Sir Thomas, he's out now, said to be cured, but after everything that happened, I can't help but wonder, if I ever set foot in Delamere Court again, I think I'll lock my door from the inside.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.